All right, let's jump right in. Tucked away in the New Testament, there's this absolute masterpiece of theology and rhetoric. It's a work so profound it has shaped Christian thought for 2 millennia. But here's the catch, the really big catch. We have absolutely no idea who wrote it. This is the book of Hebrews, and it's basically the Bible's greatest unsolved mystery.
So, who was this brilliant, anonymous author? And who were they writing to? More importantly, what kind of urgent crisis was happening that would make someone write such a powerful and complex argument? These are the exact questions at the heart of our investigation today.
So, we're going to tackle this just like a cold case. First, we'll look at the anonymous masterpiece itself. Then, we'll investigate the author, build a profile of the audience, figure out the crisis that set the clock ticking, and finally, we'll try to crack the author's secret code. Okay, let's officially open the case file. You see, unlike pretty much every other letter in the New Testament, Hebrews just starts. There's no I, Paul, an apostle, or any kind of greeting. It just dives right in, leaving us with a major puzzle from the very first verse. And just from the text, we can already start to build a profile of our mystery writer. This was not just any old letter. The Greek is some of the most elegant and complex in the entire New Testament. And the author has this stunningly deep command of the Old Testament, quoting it over and over. Whoever this person is, they are a first-rate intellectual, for sure. So, who could this person be? Well, it's time to line up the usual suspects. Over the centuries, scholars have come up with a handful of really key candidates. And here is our lineup. First, you've got the Apostle Paul. He's always been the traditional favorite. Then there's Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and Acts, and he's known for his high-quality Greek. Some have even suggested Priscilla, who is a really prominent female leader, although a masculine participle in chapter 11, where the author kind of refers to himself, does point toward a male author. And finally, there's Apollos, an eloquent teacher from Alexandria. Okay, so let's start with the prime suspect, Paul. But when you put his known letters right next to Hebrews, the case for Paul just completely falls apart. Paul always introduces himself. Hebrews is anonymous. Paul's Greek is direct, it's punchy. Hebrews is literary, it's elegant. Even their big themes and the images they use are totally different. The stylistic fingerprints just don't match up, not even close.
To put it another way, Dr. Michael Heiser came up with this really memorable analogy to describe the gap in literary quality. He says it's like the difference between reading Shakespeare and reading Left Behind. The Greek is just on a completely different level. And that right there is one of the strongest arguments against it being Paul.
So if not Paul, then who? Well, the leading candidate for a lot of scholars today is Apollos. The book of Acts describes him as an eloquent man, which was a term tied to the kind of formal rhetorical training that was super common in Alexandria, the same intellectual world as the famous philosopher Philo. Apollos' profile, well, it fits the sophisticated, brainy style of Hebrews like a glove. All right, so we've got a prime suspect for the author. But who was he writing to? Knowing the audience is every bit as crucial for solving this mystery. And the text itself gives us a ton of clues. The author talks about our fathers, which points to a Jewish Christian audience. They're a specific group he knows personally. They've been through persecution before, even had their property taken. And yet they're not new believers. They're so mature he actually tells them they ought to be teachers. But they're also in trouble, starting to skip out on their meetings. This sounds a lot like a specific house church, or maybe a small group in a bigger one, that's facing a really serious crisis. A struggling community. An urgent tone. This letter was not written just for kicks. There was a crisis, and you can feel the ticking clock. To really get the author's motive, we need to place this letter on a timeline. Most scholars date Hebrews to the AD 60s. So why then? Well, it's clearly after early persecutions, like the Edict of Claudius in 49, which the author seems to mention. But it's almost certainly written before AD 70. See, the author talks about temple rituals in the present tense, and it's pretty hard to imagine he wouldn't bring up the temple's catastrophic destruction if it had already happened. So that puts the letter right in the turbulent, dangerous years of the early Neronian persecutions. So here it is. This is the motive. This community is getting hit and hit hard. They are being persecuted. On top of that, Jesus hasn't returned as quickly as maybe they first expected, and their hope is starting to wear thin. And this leads to the ultimate danger, apostasy. Some of them are actually thinking about giving up on Jesus and just going back to the relative safety and familiarity of Judaism. This is the emergency our author is desperately trying to stop. So how does he do it? He doesn't just say, hey, don't give up. He builds this brilliant, layered, complex argument. And the key to understanding that argument isn't just about who he was, but how he read the Old Testament. This is where we find the real breakthrough in the case. The author uses this interpretive lens that scholars call sensus plenior. It's Latin, and it just means fuller meaning. This is the idea that while Old Testament passages had their own original meaning for their own time, they also contain a deeper, fuller meaning that could only be unlocked after the arrival of Jesus Christ. Now, I know what you might be thinking. That sounds a little bit like a license to make Scripture mean whatever you want it to mean, right? Oh, hey, this verse really means this. But that's not how it works. Not at all. There are rules. The key is that sensus plenior doesn't invent a new meaning. It expands on the original one. It can't contradict what the text originally meant. You see, the New Testament writers saw Jesus as the key that revealed what the Old Testament was pointing toward all along. To get it, you have to train think like an ancient Israelite, seeing layers of symbol and metaphor, and not like a 21st century literalist. And this right here is the author's master key. His entire argument is designed to show the struggling community that the priesthood, the sacrifices, the covenants, the whole Old Testament system was always pointing to something greater. It was all pointing to its fuller meaning, which is fulfilled completely and perfectly in Jesus. He is superior, so why would you ever go back? It just makes no sense. So, after examining all the evidence, what have we found? It's time to close the case file with one final profile of our author and his incredible work. Okay, let's put it all together. Our author was almost certainly a highly educated, second-generation Jewish Christian. A guy like Apollos fits the bill perfectly. He was writing in the chaotic and dangerous AD 60s to a specific community of believers that he knew and that he loved. And his motive? To deliver a powerful, urgent theological argument to stop them from abandoning their faith in Jesus under the immense pressure of persecution and doubt. You know, in the end, maybe the identity of the author was left anonymous for a reason. Because what if the real mystery of Hebrews isn't the whodunit? What if the real mystery is the profound challenge the book leaves for every single one of us, to learn to see the entire biblical story through the same lens he did, with Jesus as the key that unlocks its fuller meaning?